Hey everybody, welcome to Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions. We are recording these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday education and outreach. Today's educators and guest musicians are James Suggs and Dwayne White. You hear all that? You hear that? The roar. I love it.
That's what that was. And I'm adding to it myself.
Yes. So we're welcoming them back to these sessions. They have done individual sessions and now are coming together, and they're going to be doing a joint session today, and their topic is called Why Listening to Music is Important. Everybody's muted right now, but you have the ability to ask questions using the chat feature or the raise my hand feature, and we're going to get those questions as we go along to both James and Dwayne. If you have feedback about today's session, or if you'd like to see a special topic covered as part of our program here, please email those suggestions to info@clearwaterjazz.com, info@clearwaterjazz.com. If you go to clearwaterjazz.com/education, you'll find our education and outreach page. It talks about all our programs, but as it relates to this program, you will see all kinds of wonderful upcoming sessions and the Zoom information to join each session. You will also see in certain instances session recaps from sessions you might have missed. And you will see certain links to recommended listening, like Spotify links. For instance, today we're going to be putting up a link for James and Dwayne under the session topic, and both have taken some time to create some tracks for you to listen to that complement the session today, and in Dwayne's case, future sessions as well. So give that a few minutes to get up there, but during the session today, you should probably be able to check into that and listen. Both James and Dwayne are very special to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday. They participate in several of our outreach programs, including the Young Lions Jazz Master Sessions, History of Jazz Outreach Program, and My Journey with Jazz Session. James is a professional trumpet player currently living in St. Pete after spending 8 years living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. James's resume is long and impressive. He started playing trumpet at the age of 9, and since that time, his talents have taken him all over the world. He's received a master's degree in music, jazz performance from USF, and also serves as an adjunct professor at USF. Dwayne is one of the original Clearwater Jazz Holiday Outreach Band members for our History of Jazz program. He's a professional trumpet player and music educator. He moved to Tampa in 1996 and began a career as a music educator. He served as a music specialist at Lanier Elementary School, where his colleagues selected him as Teacher of the Year in 2004-2005. Dwayne currently works as a counselor with the Tampa YMCA Youth Development. He's also active in several arts organizations, including the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association, serving as chairman of the Education Scholarship Committee, has done a lot of great work with them as well. And you can see today one of our profile pictures up here is a logo from the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association, and that's meant to show our support and thank them for their sponsorship of this program, because it's helping us to do more and to engage more musicians and to deliver some more great content. So thank you, James. Thank you, Dwayne, for being part of this. I'm going to turn it over to you, and the stage is all yours.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. Dwayne, it's always a pleasure. And this is, we were talking earlier, this is going to be exciting for me, at least, to kind of open each other's minds and talk about this important thing called listening.
Absolutely. It's going to be a fun chat here.
I like to kind of break these things down at first and, be as simple as possible and talk about why is it important? Why is listening important? I think it seems like a really obvious thing. Like everyone would say, of course you got to listen, you got to listen. That's what we do. We listen every day. But do we actually listen the way we should every day? I think that's what we need to kind of break apart at first. And I think, for instance, if we, when we listen deeply to music, we can understand the language better. And we can understand where the history is coming from. Or if it's something that was put out yesterday, we can get inside of that and understand where they are coming from. It's kind of like that connecting fiber that we're all looking for, right?
James, there was one word that you just said that I love, especially when it comes to the topic of listening, and that was language. Everybody's always heard of music being analogous to language. You think of a language, how do you learn how to speak a language? I mean, you can sit there with all of the books and read and do that, but at some point you have to speak the language and listen to other people speak the language. That's really how you learn the language. Exactly.
And you're right. And like, I'm still working on Spanish. I wish it was better than it is, but I have a few years put into it. And one thing is opening a book that says how to speak Spanish. And honestly, I don't think that's the best way. I mean, you can learn a lot of things, vocabulary and conjugation and that, but when it comes down to it, when you go and speak to Spanish-speaking people, you need to be around them. You need to know how it sounds, the inflections, the sarcasm, the jokes, all of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you're listening to music. Music it's both simple and complex. There's so many nuances that you can gain in listening to music. That's why I think listening is really important to do.
I was thinking about like the struggle that classical musicians have compared to jazz musicians. For once, the coin is flipped. We usually say we have the struggle more than them.
Right.
But as far as listening, you can't go and listen to Beethoven premiering his Fifth Symphony. We can't go back and listen to Bach. So the classical players don't really know how it was played originally.
Right.
Whereas we as jazz musicians, we can go back to listen to most of what we're trying to play, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, I mean, Buddy Bolden is kind of like the historic figure that, for those of you who don't know, Buddy Bolden was one of the first influential jazz trumpet players from New Orleans, Dwayne's hometown.
Yes, indeed.
But there is no, that I know of, there are no recordings of him. So, there's speculation, there's all these stories, and we don't know if they're exaggerated or what. But, there are very few musicians like him in the history of jazz that we can't go back and say, all right, this is the way he played eighth notes. This is the way he attacked the note. This is the way he slurred this.
Right. The closer you can get to someone like Buddy Bolden, there are people that were around during that time that either played with Buddy Bolden or heard him play, and they tell stories. The stories are the only thing that we have from Buddy Bolden or figures like that.
Yeah.
That's the closest we can get. But like you said, we can't directly hear what he did and what he sounded like when he slurred this note, or how did it sound? We can't hear that.
Yeah. And would you say that going back and talking to the people that are, well, I don't know if they're still alive, but we're alive, able to kind of recount their experience hearing Buddy Bolden, is that a form of listening?
I think it is a form of listening. It's not, of course, direct listening, but you can gain, let's say you can gain some background of it. Yeah. You of course you don't know exactly what it would sound like, but you can get an idea and you can kind of construct an idea in your mind of what it sounded like.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, you know, like for us, we can talk to the local legends like John Lamb and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there have been times when John has told me, it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be like this, you know, and the only way that John Lamb could do it. And yeah. And I think that's a form of, you know, I'm not actually listening to the original way that he has in his mind, but he is conveying his interpretation of it. So it's kind of a form of collecting that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about, I was thinking about the difference between hearing and listening. So this is under the big subject of how to listen, hearing and listening. So let's say you're driving in your car, you're taking a walk, you're going for a run, you're listening to music. Are you listening or are you hearing? That's something that I kind of call myself out on. You know, I say, yeah, I was, you know, listening to this recording the other day in my car, but I'm driving on 275 and I'm worried about the traffic. I don't want to get in an accident. I'm thinking about where I have to go, when I have to get there, am I on time and all that. And for me, I don't think that's true. That's the right way to listen. I think that's kind of hearing, like it's in the background. I'm hearing what's going on. Maybe some things stick, but for the most part, my mind is going everywhere else.
Right. I mentioned before in sessions, I used to teach elementary school music, and we would cover that a lot, the difference between hearing and listening. Mm. And a way I used to describe it, or I still describe it, hearing is what happens. It's a physical process that your ears do. So the sound goes in and the bones and things vibrate, and that's what hearing is. Listening is the next step. It's taking what your ears take in and finding some way to use what your ears have taken in. So I think that's what listening really is. And so, and to your point, while you're driving, yes, you're hearing things, but are you really using what your ears to take in to construct something in some way, shape, or form?
That's great, man. Great explanation. That's yeah, I never thought about that. You know, the actual scientific background behind that. That's great. So if we're talking about how important listening is, that means we have to put ourselves in an environment that's conducive to deep listening. So I always talk about, you know, back in the day when I was fortunate enough to have Sean Jones as a classmate, the great trumpet player. We'd be in undergrad and we'd have listening sessions. And at first, you know, I didn't really understand the importance of them until I got to the first one. And it was so obsessive and so specific. And all of a sudden, it wasn't this giant flood of music and instruments and musicians. It was isolating. We were listening to just one specific portion of that track, you know, for instance, Miles Davis, and then we go back and listen to, you know, Red Garland's left hand, and we go back and listen to his right hand. So that kind of specific isolation, I think, is important for true listening and absorbing what we want to absorb.
Yeah, definitely. Again, going back to what I said about listening, being able to take what your ears take in and use it in a manner, in some constructive manner. Listening, that has to be a part of it. You have to be able to go and listen intently for specific items. And when you do that, you can take those things and kind of rearrange them if you want, or construct them in whatever way you choose to.
Yep.
I think that's important.
Did you ever have listening sessions like that, or was that just a kind of on your own thing?
Absolutely. When I was at FAM, we would have sessions like that all the time. As a matter of fact, one of the things we used to do, we would listen to specific tracks and learn the particular song. Like we would get together, a bass player, piano player, trumpet player, saxophone player, whatever instrument, and would learn we would learn our parts in that particular song.
Wow.
And then we would actually play the melody, and we would improvise our own solos, of course, but we would try to get as close to as we could to the nature of the way the song it actually was. So we used to do that all the time.
So you guys took it to another level. I need to do that.
I guess you could say that.
That's awesome.
But really, it is really the same thing, though. You all were listening, and again, you all were listening for those specific items in the music. We did the same thing. We just did a little bit more with it afterwards, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I think that, I was thinking about how, like you were saying, that we would listen to something, and a lot of times when that one thing would happen, someone would say, this is happening. We'd call attention to it. We'd put it into words. We'd say, so-and-so is doing this. Can you hear that? Am I the only one? And a lot of times I wasn't the only one, or they weren't the only one. We could agree on, yes, this is happening. It's something unusual. It's something special that that's not common with other musicians. Or so I think that's an important thing, is like calling those things out, putting them into words and saying, this is happening. Isn't that cool? Isn't that special? And you remember the downbeat, what was it called? The listening, what was it called? In Downbeat magazine, they'd have the
blindfold test.
Blindfold test.
Blindfold.
And I'm sure they still do it, but I haven't checked out Downbeat in a while. But so yeah, I always wanted to be, I wanted that blindfold test, but then I was also scared that I wouldn't get any. So for those of you who don't know, blindfold test was at the back of the Downbeat magazine, which is a classic jazz magazine. It's been one of the oldest, if not the oldest. And at the back, they'd choose a famous jazz musician, and they'd give them pretty much a quiz, a listening quiz, and they'd play, a recording of another trumpet player, if it was a trumpet player. And this person would have to guess, who was playing and what recording and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes, it's hit or miss. Sometimes these people didn't know, they were tricked, and other times they knew off the bat, it's obviously so-and-so. So I think that right there is like a great testament to how we need to be as jazz musicians, especially.
Right. That blindfold test idea, that's a great idea for, getting together with your cohorts, and a great idea for the listening session itself. Mm-hmm. Listening for specific things, like pulling a group of saxophone players together and playing some saxophone players and asking who that was. Because one of the things in the blindfold test, in their responses, sometimes even if they didn't know who it was, they would speak about what the track was or what was going on in the track. And that sometimes was even more important, whether they named the person or not.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, man, that's deep, because they didn't know who it was exactly, but they could explain what they were hearing, and hearing one of our heroes, musical heroes, explaining what they're hearing and how it makes them feel, and what they attribute it to. That's super important, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. So, for instance, like I, piggybacking off of that, I started doing those kind of things, I started even before, I think, because I started listening to jazz when I was about 10 or 11. So I got an early start. But, you know, like I said, I don't know if it was hearing at first or listening. You know, I think the true listening came after. And once I started to really listen, I could remember the sounds and the styles of certain players. And still to this day, when I hear those certain players, it's like just, you know, sometimes just one note or two notes, you know, I can tell who that player is. I mean, and it's cool because I think I mentioned this in my last session here. It's like, you know, if someone calls you on the phone and it's a blocked number or an unknown number, you either recognize that voice immediately or it takes you a while or you don't recognize it. And I think it's the same. I think we need to be the same way with listening. I want to recognize. I want one note to recognize these greats. You know, these classical musicians. I always get frustrated with myself when, you know, like my wife and I listen to satellite radio and, you know, online radio and things like that. And you know, so I'll be in the other room and I hear this awesome sound, whether it's a voice or an instrument, and I think, all right, who is this? Who is this? Who is? I start doing, all right, he did this, the vibrato, the, you know, I start, you know, like start quizzing myself, and it's a cool kind of, you know, personal quiz to think, all right, do I know who this person is? And hopefully I do.
Yeah, definitely. You know, James, it's interesting. The more I get to know you, and the more we kind of hear about each other's story. We have a lot in common, you and I, because I started actually playing about the same time. And although I grew up in New Orleans, I grew up in the late 70s into the early 80s. And of course, the music around that time that was the popular music, that was the advent of hip hop. So as a young boy, I was really absorbed into that music.
Wow.
Sure, jazz music was around being in New Orleans, and of course I was able to experience that. But sort of like you said a minute ago, was it really listening or was it hearing? I think I was hearing that music, but it wasn't until a little bit later I actually actively decided to pursue it. So I would start listening and, you know, learning things from it that way. So in that respect, you and I have a lot in common, man.
We need to hang out more. That's what that means.
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
That's awesome, man. It's cool to hear about your background, and, you know, like it's interesting because New Orleans is one of those places, those mystical places that I've been there once for a jazz fest, and I mean, I had a ball, man. It was just incredible. But there is this intimidation factor that every trumpet player is there. You know, like that's where jazz was born. Like it's, you know, I've thought about moving there, but I don't know if I can bring myself to do it because it's just so intimidating.
If you think about that from your perspective, of everybody in New Orleans is a great trumpet. Think about being a trumpet player living in New Orleans.
Yeah,
think about it from that perspective.
Exactly.
That is like really a daunting task.
No, man, I'm sure. So, for instance, like Steve mentioned at the beginning, we both created our separate playlists, and I named mine "Listening Challenge." And the challenge is, you know, this is for anyone, whatever level, however, whatever experience you have with jazz music. It doesn't matter because you can still make it a challenge for yourself. I think the main thing is to pick out certain things from each song or each musician that are stereotypical. Something, you know, we all have these things that make us sound like us, hopefully. And especially with these jazz legends, they have these sounds, they have these approaches, whether it be melodic things, harmonic things, the instrument, the mouthpiece, all of that. So I posted something, a playlist on Spotify with a list of musicians. And just to run down that list that I put, it was Red Garland, Jimmy Cobb, Lester Young, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Stan Getz, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, Dexter Gordon, Art Tatum, Paul Chambers, John Scofield, Oscar Peterson. That's a long list. Yeah, that's a long list. But you know what? I was thinking about all of the people. Well, I mean, there's many more, but I was thinking about all of the classic musicians that I think, not just trumpet, all musicians, and for me, each of those people have something really distinctive. So when I hear most of those people, most of the time, I can pick them out and I can say that is them. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, definitely. That's one thing about all of those people that are on that list you named, definitely. But the people that we normally think of as heroes or people that aspire toward, each one of them was completely individual. They had their own individual sounds. And like you were saying, you hear a note or two, that's that person, or that's that person.
Yeah.
They were definitely like that.
And I was kind of mentioning this on my last session as well, that I think it's so cool seeing hearing, I should say, the family tree, the lineage of jazz musicians. For instance, if we're talking about trumpet players, which we like to do, Dizzy Gillespie came from Roy Eldridge, right? Lee Morgan, you could say, came from Clifford Brown, or Clifford Brown, you could say, came from Fats Navarro. There's that lineage, and you can hear it. If you hear young whoever, young Dizzy Gillespie, he sounds like Roy Eldridge. To me, you can hear certain things, but I think that's, their listening was so in-depth, so important, that they not only listened the way they should, but they actually started to sound like this person until eventually they came into their own and they started to sound like the people that we know.
You're familiar with that Clark Terry saying, right? The jazz is a 3-step process.
Yeah.
That imitation, you learn to imitate, which is basically what they did. They learned to imitate what that person that their hero was. And then you assimilate, you take what you got from that information you got from that, and you start to put it together in your own way. And you say, if you do those two things well enough, then you can innovate. That's the third step.
And that's what, he was a classic example of that. He you can hear all those steps in his playing, just like a lot of those classic players. It's interesting. My cousin posted something on Facebook a while ago, and it said, like, I was listening to you talk. We haven't seen each other in a while. He said, I was listening to you talk, and I realized that you sound a lot like your father. And those kind of things. It's not like I went out and tried to sound like my father, but being around my father for so long, so many days, so like hearing every accent and inflection and all that, naturally I'm going to start sounding like him. And I think that's the same thing with listening to music, is that if we are around that and we're in that environment nonstop, there's no way we're not going to start picking up those sounds that we want to sound like.
That is definitely the truth. Whatever environment that you are around, it's just a natural process. If you'll hear it so much that you actually start to listening to it.
Yeah, exactly. Hearing becomes listening.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully. And we talked about this next thing a few. Also, I saw Steve posted that, if anyone has questions, please chime in and interrupt us. We appreciate the interruption. I did see that someone posted that Christian McBride is currently still doing the blindfold tests, which is awesome.
It is.
And so check those out. They're really cool. Well, the next thing I was thinking about was different ways of listening. For instance, if you're in a big band, which occasionally we are, we're thrown into a big band trumpet section. How important is listening in that environment for you?
Oh, it's extremely important. You know, because especially being in a section, the section has to sound like one unit.
Hmm.
So in order for that to happen, you have to be listening to everybody. You have to be listening to the lead player. You have to be listening to where your part fits in. So listening is extremely important in that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think also listening, I think that's number one, which these kind of things don't get talked about a lot, unfortunately. What to do in a big band. We know that we have to play the part, that, play the notes, play in tune and all that good stuff. But we don't talk about a lot about listening, listening to the lead player. And if you're the lead player, then you should be listening to the other lead players, which means lead trombone and lead sax. But then also you got the rhythm section. I mean, there's a lot of listening that has to be happening all at once, I think, to make it all happen.
Yeah, I agree. It's listening is extremely important. And like I mentioned, not only you need to be able to listen to what you're doing and listen to the parts around you to see how your part fits into the whole as well. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about as much as it should, I think.
Yep. I actually, I don't know if I told you the story. It was my first day playing with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, and it was, sight reading and everything. And I felt so proud that I, did a good job. And at the end of the gig, the lead trumpet player leaned over to me and he said, "You did this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong." I mean, he had a list of things, and it was all about those intricate things about listening. Because I was the new guy, they already had their listening down. They already were listening to each other and almost kind of expecting, they knew what was to come. They knew how to do it before it even happened. So that was a big wake-up call that, okay, just reading the notes is not it. That's nothing in comparison. If you listen to the Count Basie Orchestra and then you listen to the Duke Ellington Orchestra, that's a completely different way of listening, or the listening that they did with each other and playing they did with each other.
Right, definitely. So, I had the experience of actually playing alongside some of the trumpet players from the Count Basie Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
Being at FAMU, they came through a couple of times, and actually the current director of the Count Basie Orchestra, Scotty Barnard, he's a FAMU grad, and he and I were good friends. He's somebody who's bears a lot of responsibility of me becoming the player that I am today. So anyway, the Basie Orchestra came through, and we had a workshop where we would sit in the section alongside them and play the charts as they were playing them.
Oh, wow.
And they would do some of the same things that the Glenn Miller guy, the lead player there, told you, yeah, this is wrong. Or they were a little more constructive in it, since we were younger players. We weren't actually on the bandstand getting paid. But it's the same thing. They said, "Hey, you might want to try this." And did you hear how we did that? Pointed out different things that way as well.
I think that's important because, especially, I mean, what an amazing experience to be side by side, learning like that. But I think that's really important to have these players with more experience let us know what we need to be listening to and listening for, because I think otherwise we might not know. I think we have this preconceived notion, all right, this is what you need to do, in any setting. We could be talking about a combo as well. I think, I learned a lot about listening, playing with more seasoned players in a combo section. or a session, just from listening and what to listen to, not what I thought, but there's more. There are things that I wasn't doing or I'm not doing that can be improved upon.
Yeah, that's definitely an important thing to have somebody who's a little more experienced to help guide you to things the points that you should listen for, or ways that you should listen to certain things. I think that's an extremely important point.
Hey, James and Dwayne, do you guys watch live performances frequently online, like YouTube, jam sessions, live concerts, particularly in this environment where there's not a lot of live performance right now?
James?
Yeah, I mean, I try to whenever I can catch something that I'm really interested in, and I definitely try to listen to live stuff.
I'm going to give you a one-word answer, Steve. Yes.
So when you're doing that, we're talking about, we're relatively the same age, and we listen to recorded music and continue to stream music. But now with the advent of technology, and you have a lot of live video performance out there, is there a different kind of value that adds to an aspiring musician than just listening to traditional recordings?
I definitely think so, Steve. Whether we do or not, we need to check in on what's going on today in today's world. So, I mean, yeah, these recordings, fortunately, will be the old recordings will be around forever, fortunately. But I do think it's important to check out what's going on, and what I always want to hear new trumpet players or the trumpet players that I've grown to love that are still making recordings or doing live broadcasts. I want to hear what kind of language and what kind of nuances they're dealing with in today's world. I think that's really important to kind of keep yourself actual and up to date.
I agree with you, and I think it's important to have both. Keep an ear on what's going on today. I do that a lot as well. Just like you, James, I want to find out who's doing the things out there that I want, but also to keep that ear to the past, because you have in that way you have a frame of reference. You have something to compare. Is this, you hear something that happens today, is this something that I really want to incorporate, based on what I've heard before? You have some point of comparison, so you can compare and contrast, so to speak.
Did you guys, JJ just made a comment. This isn't really a question, more of a comment. This past year, Winton did a...
that guy.
Yeah, did an interview with NPR about composing the music for the Bolden film. Because he didn't have the recordings of Buddy Bolden, he said he had to listen to musicians who were either contemporaries of his or influenced by him and approximate the sound based off of those historical accounts. Hearing about the process was really intriguing. Where do you see jazz going in the next decade?
Wow. JJ, ease up on the heavy questions.
Yeah, right. Go ahead. I don't know if you want to, but I sort of what I was saying. That's basically Winton said what I was saying earlier. We didn't know what Buddy Bolden sounded like, but there were people around that were contemporaries of his that shared bandstand with him or heard him play. So you can get an idea from that. Now, the second part of that question, JJ, that's a really important or a really tough question to tackle, because there's so much going on. There's so many players today that are doing different things, And jazz has sort of always been that way. It's always been taking something on the cutting edge and incorporating it into what we're doing. So, I mean, that's a tough question to answer. Where is jazz going to go? I to be honest with you, I really don't know. I do know it will continue to evolve and move forward. I do know that. Now, where it's going to go, I'm not exactly sure.
Hey guys, we have about maybe 5 minutes remaining. We've got another session today, a guitar session starting at 5:30, which we're excited about. But I wanted to, Jazz Holiday Foundation has a lot of programs supporting and creating opportunities for young jazz musicians. We do a lot of programs with high school jazz musicians. And so to those musicians who have discovered their instrument, as it relates to active listening, what are the takeaways really for them to more deliberately start with a strategy of how listening can really impact their journey with jazz?
It's something I think we could go back to something we mentioned before, is that the specific listening to specific players that are legendary in jazz history, and picking out exactly what they have different in their sounds and their approach to music, and being as specific as possible, putting it into words. And I think once you do that, that kind of homework, almost, you start to incorporate it into your own sound. And that is one of the biggest ways to develop your own sound and to grow as a musician.
Yeah, kind of what I said earlier about what we used to do when I was at FAMU. You can take that to the next step. Listen and do all of those things, and then learn exactly what they did and try to duplicate what you heard on your particular instrument. I mean, they call that transcribing, or learning solos or whatever. But that's something that requires definite deep listening. I mean, there's no way you can do that without listening and doing that listening repetitively. You have to do that over and over and over. So that's I think that's something that young players should, if they haven't started doing that already, because I know a lot of them have, to start doing that. Listen and try to listen for those specific things inside of what you're hearing, and try to recreate it. The goal is not for you to play like that person, because that's impossible anyway. They were them, you're you. So you won't be able to play it like them. You might be able to approach how they did it. But I think it's important to learn a little bit about how it was done.
Oh, that's wonderful. We were able to put up during this session a Spotify link to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Spotify channel for some recommended listening. We have James Suggs' listening challenge up there right now, and we're in the process of putting Dwayne's recommended listening playlist on this session. So later this evening, you can sign on and click on the Trumpet, the Why Listening to Music is Important session, and see both those links and enjoy those playlists. So thank you both for putting those together. In just a few minutes, maybe in the next 15 minutes, JJ Padishal is going to be with us on navigating the neck with diatonic chord scales. And this will be his second session with us, so we're really excited about that. And next week, this continues. We've got a lot of great musicians with us. We have Butch Thomas doing his second part series on the learning head charts, beginning jazz standards. Brandon Robertson is back with us, this time with a focus on his instrument, the bass, how to develop melodic bass lines. And John O'Leary back with us on how to develop a language for improvisation on piano. Dwayne, you're going to be back with us on June 17th using scales for ideas. And the list goes on. I know that James is going to be with us again in the future. We're going to get together and talk about some fun ideas. So I'm going to turn it back over to you both just for just a final couple thoughts if you wanted to squeeze anything else in. But we really appreciate you having both of you involved with this program. And thanks for just the great content and for being part of the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation family.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to all that were tuning in, and we really appreciate it. It's a great way for us to kind of stay connected with the community. And yeah, if anything, even if you're not a musician, go and listen to some of these recordings and truly listen. Don't have anyone around you talking to you. Don't drive, don't walk, don't just sit there and listen. And I assure you, you're going to start to hear new things, which will only better you as a person.
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you, Steve. I always appreciate being here with the Clearwater, being a part of what we do to share with people in our community. And like James just said, and by the way, thank you, James. I appreciate the time we spent here. And yeah, we are going to have to hang out some more.
Definitely.
But one thing I would suggest is listening. And this was a way that listening was taught to me at one point. When you listen to something, listen to various, or pick like instruments, just starting with instruments, since most jazz that we listen to, and a lot of times has a lot of instrumentals in it. Pick like the trumpet, and the first time through, listen to the trumpet and the bass, or the next time through, listen to the trumpet and the piano, or the trumpet and the drums. Pair different instruments together, and I think that will reward your listening, because you'll be able to hear lots of different connections and how things are, how players go together in creating what they do. So I definitely would recommend that.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. Stay safe and be well, everybody. We usually say keep playing, but for the purposes of today's session, we're going to say keep playing and keep listening.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
All right. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks again.
Thank you. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.